They backed up to his fence and dumped it like he was a landfill. He wrote down every serial number anyway, every single one. 20 years of iron stacked 6 deep along a quarter-mile of fence line. Then the foundry closed, and every farmer in 3 counties came walking his fence with a tape measure. Dale Hennessy, at 22, stood at the fence line with his grandfather's dirt still fresh under his fingernails from the burial that morning. The oilcloth notebook sat open in his left hand, water-stained and soft as a worn dollar bill, and the first page held 7 words in Emmett's careful block print. "Nothing is scrap until the last one is gone." He read it twice. Then he tucked the stub pencil back into the spine, slid the notebook into the breast pocket of his dark green canvas jacket, and looked out across 160 acres of rough pasture that nobody in Harlan County wanted. Too steep for tobacco, too rocky for corn. The ridgeline tilted at 12 degrees in places, and the topsoil was thin as a promise. 6 inches of pale clay over limestone shelves that broke plow points like they were made of chalk. Emmett had run a few head of cattle on it, never more than 20, and even they'd worn paths into the hillside that eroded every spring into red gullies deep enough to lose a boot in. Dale had $340 in a passbook savings account at the Harlan National. He had a 1961 Ford 4000 tractor with a cracked head gasket that wept coolant onto the exhaust manifold and smelled like burnt sugar when it ran. He had the house, a 4-room frame structure with a kitchen wood stove that drew poorly and a roof that needed 20 squares of shingle before November. And he had one offer already. Lester Combs from Southeast Timber had stopped him after the funeral reception, still holding a paper plate of potato salad, and said he could write a check for $12,000 by Friday if Dale wanted to be done with it. Clean sale. They'd take the timber rights, doze the ridgeline flat for a logging road, and Dale could walk away into something that made sense. $12,000. In 1974, in Harlan County, that was real money for a man with no degree and no trade and no particular plan beyond the fact that his grandfather had left him this land and this notebook and nothing else. He didn't take the offer. 6 days later, a rust-orange pickup he didn't recognize backed up to the fence along the lower road. A man Dale had never met turned out to be Harley Pruitt, cousin to the Sloan family 2 hollows over, dropped the tailgate and rolled a cracked Ford 351 Windsor engine block off the bed. It hit the grass with a sound like a church bell wrapped in a blanket. Deep. Final. Dale walked down from the porch. The block sat there in the November weeds, 420 pounds of cast iron with a crack running from the number 3 cylinder bore to the water jacket. Coolant stains fanned out from it like the rings of a dead tree. "Why?" Dale asked. Harley Pruitt shrugged with one shoulder. "Foundry in Middlesboro won't take it. Wrong alloy, they say. Dump charges $14. He looked at the land, at the steep pasture, at the lack of anything that resembled prosperity. "You don't seem to care what's on your line." That sentence hung there like a slap dressed up as a favor. Dale pulled the oilcloth notebook from his breast pocket. He opened it to the second page, the first blank one after Emmett's refrain, and wrote, 351W, 11/18/74. Cast number D0AE-6015-A2. Crack, number 3 bore to WJ, longitudinal, approx 4.5 inches. Bore dia, 4.000 STD. Harley watched him write. Didn't ask why. Just got back in his truck and left. That night, Dale sat at the kitchen table with Emmett's notebook and 3 others he'd found in the bottom drawer of the bureau. Older ones, dating back to 1959. His grandfather had filled them with notes on cast iron. Not poetry about it, not sentiment. Metallurgy. Emmett had worked summers at the Ashland Foundry before the war, and he'd carried that knowledge home like a man carries a pocket knife. Always there, always useful, never shown off. Cast iron is never dead, only sleeping. That's what the 1962 notebook said. Every block is a known quantity if you catalog it. The alloy tells you the carbon content. The casting number tells you the year, the plant, the intended application. The crack location tells you what failed and what didn't. A longitudinal crack in a cylinder bore means thermal stress. The metal expanded unevenly, probably from a coolant failure. But the rest of the block? The main caps, the lifter valley, the bell housing flange? Sound as the day it was poured. Dale didn't know yet what he'd do with that information, but he wrote it down. 2 weeks later, Roger Kimball from the County Extension Office drove up in his clean white Chevy with the seal on the door. Clipboard in hand, polished shoes that had never touched mud deeper than a puddle. He stood on Dale's porch and suggested, in that particular tone that men with clipboards use when they think they're being generous, that Dale clean up the eyesore by the lower fence and apply for the hay subsidy program. 2.2 bales per acre was the county target. The land could maybe support it with enough lime and fertilizer. The government would front 60% of the input costs. "Son, I knew your granddaddy," Kimball said. "Good man. But he had some unusual ideas about how land ought to be used. You're young enough to do this right." He smiled like he was handing Dale a gift. "Get that iron off the fence line before someone reports it. Makes the whole hollow look like a dump." Dale stood with his weight forward on the balls of his feet, hands resting on the porch rail. Pale gray-blue eyes level. Sandy hair dusty from a morning splitting stove wood. "The farm is not for sale," he said. "Neither is the fence." Kimball's smile thinned. He wrote something on his clipboard, got back in his clean truck, and left. Over the next 6 weeks, 4 more blocks arrived. A Chevy 350 with a spun bearing that had eaten the main saddle. A Pontiac 400 with a cracked deck surface. A flathead Ford, old enough to be interesting, with a seized camshaft. And a second Windsor, this one a 302, dropped without a word by someone who didn't even get out of the truck. Each time, Dale walked to the fence. Each time, he pulled the black oilcloth notebook from his left breast pocket, uncapped the stub pencil, and recorded. Serial number, date, alloy family, crack location, bore diameter. The notebook grew heavier with data. The fence line grew heavier with iron. The 5th block arrived on a Tuesday morning in January, unannounced, backed up to the fence by a flatbed he didn't recognize. Dale added its serial number to the notebook without looking up. The system had begun. By 1977, Dale's fence line holds 41 blocks, and the neighbors have started calling it Hennessy's Junkyard. 41 cast-iron lumps sitting in a row along a cedar fence like some kind of industrial graveyard. Chevy small blocks, Ford FEs, a couple Pontiacs, even an International Harvester diesel that weighs close to 400 pounds by itself. Lined up neat, serial numbers facing out, each one catalogued in that black oilcloth notebook with a stub pencil. From the road, it looks like the work of a man who lost his mind, inheriting a dead grandfather's delusions. And the neighbors, oh, they let him know. A man named Porter Skaggs runs 600 acres of tobacco east of the creek, pulls his truck alongside Dale one morning at the co-op. Big grin. The kind of grin that costs nothing and means less. "Hennessy, I'll give you $50 for that whole iron garden of yours. Scrap weight. Save you the embarrassment of looking at it another winter." $50 for 41 engine blocks. That's $1.22 per unit for castings that took 100,000 BTUs each to pour. For machined surfaces. For iron that remembers its shape under heat. Dale shifts his weight forward on those steel-toe boots, pale gray-blue eyes level under heavy brows, the faint scatter of freckles across his cheekbones catching morning light. He doesn't argue, doesn't explain, just says, "Appreciate the offer." Then he loads his feed and drives home. That's it. That's the whole conversation. And it's louder than any speech because Porter Skaggs has to stand there in the parking lot, realizing he just got dismissed by a 23-year-old kid with oil stains on his duck-cloth trousers and a pencil stub behind his ear. Back at the shop, and by shop I mean the open side of Emmett's old tobacco barn, concrete floor, single bare bulb, a wood stove in the corner, Dale opens the journal to the pages he's been circling back to for weeks. Deeper entries now. Not the inventory lists from the front section. These are the pages where Emmett's handwriting gets tight and precise, where the old man drew cross-sections of cylinder walls with a draftsman's care. Bore tolerances measured to the thousandth. Thermal stress diagrams showing how cast iron moves when it heats, expanding unevenly at the deck surface versus the main bearing saddles. Notes on reading cracks. A crack that crosses a bolt hole is cosmetic 9 times in 10. A crack that follows the water jacket, that block is a doorstop. Arrows pointing to specific stress risers where the casting is thin. Warnings in the margins. Instructions from a dead man who never got to teach his grandson face to face. The iron tells you its speed. Listen or lose it. That line appears 3 times in the journal. Underlined once. Circled once. And the 3rd time just written plain, like Emmett finally trusted it enough to let it stand alone. Dale develops a system for sorting the keepers from the scrap. He takes Emmett's propane torch, a brass-bodied turner that's older than Dale himself, and heats each block along its deck surface, slow and even, watching the cast iron change color. Then he wipes light machine oil across the heated area with a rag. Where the oil seeps into a crack and darkens, he marks it with a white grease pencil. Shallow cracks hold the oil at the surface, a dark, wet line that doesn't spread. But a crack that penetrates the water jacket, that oil vanishes, wicks down into the cooling passages, and disappears like water into sand. 12 blocks pass the test. 12 out of 41 with cracks that don't reach the jacket. 12 candidates for a second life. Now he has to give them one. Emmett's boring bar sits in the corner of the barn like a medieval instrument. A vertical column, a rotating spindle, A cutting head that adjusts with a micrometer dial worn smooth from decades of Emmett's thumb. No motor. You turn the feed wheel by hand, feeling the cut through your palm. Dale picks a 283 Chevy block. Good iron, shallow cracks only at the exhaust ports. He sets it on the boring plate, centers the spindle over cylinder number 1, and begins to cut. The chatter starts almost immediately. A high, screaming vibration that resonates through the whole barn. The cutting tool bounces, skips, digs in at one spot, and rides up at another. Dale doesn't stop fast enough. By the time he pulls the bar out, cylinder 1 is egg-shaped, 2/1000ths out of round. Useless. A good block, ruined. He sits on the concrete floor with the 283 between his knees and the notebook open in his lap. The iron tells you its speed. Listen or lose it. He'd been feeding too fast, pushing the cut like a man in a hurry. Cast iron doesn't forgive impatience. It's not steel. It doesn't stretch and warn you. It fractures. It chatters. It goes where it wants if you don't respect its grain. The fix comes from Emmett's own troubleshooting notes 3 pages later. Tap the cylinder wall with a brass rod. A high ring means dense grain. Slow your feed. A dull thud means open grain. You can push. Every casting is different. Every cylinder in the same block can be different. Dale picks up Emmett's brass drift pin, taps the walls of a 327 block. Cylinder 1 rings high and clean. He cuts it at half the feed rate he'd tried before, turning that wheel so slow his forearm burns. The tool bites in smooth and stays smooth, a continuous whisper of iron dust spiraling off the cutting edge like gray snow. 4 cylinders, each one tapped, each one listened to, each one bored 30/1000ths over standard. He measures with Emmett's inside micrometer, round within 0.5 on every bore. Clean crosshatch from the honing stones, ready for pistons. 6 weeks later, a tobacco farmer named Virgil Combs shows up at the barn. His grain truck threw a rod, 327 Chevy, the only engine that fits without fabricating new mounts. The Foundry over in Middlesboro wants $400 and 6 weeks. Virgil doesn't have 6 weeks. Corn's drying in the field. Dale walks him to the fence line, points to a 327 block, third from the end. 175, bored 30 over, ready for assembly. Virgil squints like a man being sold something too cheap to be real. That thing sat in a field. It sat in my fence, Dale says, and now it's machined. Virgil takes it because he has no other option. Bolts it together in his own barn with new pistons and rings, drops it in the truck, turns the key. It runs. Dale completes his first successful rebore on a 1968 Chevy 327 block using Emmett's hand tools and sells it for $175, more than he's made from hay all season. Word doesn't exactly spread. It seeps, the way oil seeps into a hairline crack, slow and quiet and impossible to stop. That first sale, the 327 block, nets Dale more than hay did in 3 months of cutting and baling. And look, nobody throws a parade. Nobody writes it up in the Gazette. But a man at the machine shop in Creswell mentions it to a buddy rebuilding a Camaro. That buddy calls Dale, asks if he's got anything in a 350 family, maybe a 69 or 70. Dale walks the fence line, checks his notebook, the black oilcloth one, stub pencil tucked in the spine, and says he's got a 70 with clean bores, no cracks, original freeze plugs intact. 3 days later, the man drives out with a trailer and $200 cash. That's the rhythm from 1978 through 1982. One sale every couple months, sometimes 6 weeks apart, sometimes 10. 175 here, 200 there. Once, 240 for a Ford FE block that a guy in Eugene needed for a drag build. It's not wealth, it's survival. The hay still runs. Dale still cuts his 40 acres twice a summer, still stacks bales in the old barn, still sells them at $1.80 a bale to the horse people up the road. But the hay covers feed and fuel. The iron pays for the boring bar upgrades, a new set of stones, a dial bore gauge accurate to 1/10 of a thousandth, a torque plate he fabricates himself from a slab of half-inch steel, drilled and tapped to match Chevy bell housing patterns. And the notebook evolves. What starts as a list becomes a system. What starts as a system becomes, honestly, a small library. Dale's handwriting, tight, slanted, all caps like a draftsman's, fills page after page of the oilcloth notebook, then a second one, then a third. Each block gets an entry. Block family, Chevy small block, Ford Windsor, Pontiac 400, Olds 455. Year range, bore size, stock and current. Crack status, clean, hairline at deck, cracked at main web, thermal crack at cylinder 4. Date received, donor name if he got one, where it sits on the fence line, row, position, count from the gate post. By 1980, he can find a specific casting in under 10 minutes across 200 blocks. A guy calls asking for a '68 Pontiac 350. Dale flips 3 pages, walks 40 feet along the north row, and puts his hand on it. Cold iron under his palm. Moss on the valley cover rail. Casting number right where it should be. That's not hoarding. That's inventory management. That's a parts business run out of a fence line and a breast pocket. Now here's where it gets interesting for anyone who's ever cracked a block or wondered why some engines last forever and others split like firewood. Cast iron isn't all the same. Not even close. The blocks Dale pulls from 60s-era trucks and muscle cars, those castings are thick-walled, heavy, over-engineered by guys who figured cubic inches were cheap and weight didn't matter. A '68 Chevy 327 has cylinder walls you could bore 30, 40, even 60 thousandths over and still have meat left. Forgiveness built right into the iron. You can clean up a scored bore, true it to round, and that block will run another 100,000 miles without blinking. The '70s stuff? Different animal entirely. Emissions era hits, and suddenly Detroit needs lighter blocks to offset catalytic converters and smog pumps. Walls get thinner. The iron mix changes. Less gneiss structure, more perlite, different cooling characteristics. A '76 block cracks where a '66 block just flexes. Dale learns this with his hands, not a textbook. He learns it by watching the boring bar chatter against a thin wall, by seeing a hairline open up during a hot tank cleaning that wasn't there before. The '60s are gold. The '70s are marginal. Useful, but you have to know which ones and why. He writes it all down, cross-references it, builds a knowledge base that no one else in Lane County possesses because no one else bothered to look. And the cracked ones? He keeps those too. Every single one. People ask him why. The scrap hauler who comes by once a year. The neighbor who thinks the fence line looks like a junkyard. Dale's answer never changes. He points to the barn wall where he's painted it in white brushstrokes. Emmett's words made permanent. Nothing is scrap until the last one is gone. Sometimes a guy needs a cracked block for the bell housing bolt pattern alone. Sometimes a machine shop wants one to practice line honing on. Sometimes, and this happens twice in 1981, a block everyone wrote off as cracked turns out to have a porosity line that a good pin and stitch repair makes whole again. Nothing is scrap until the last one is gone. Winter of 1981. Dale sits at the kitchen table, the same oak table Emmett built in 1954, worn smooth at the elbows, and stares at a property tax bill. $240. He's got $60 in the account. The hay check won't come until March. Outside, it's 31 degrees, and the rain hasn't stopped in 9 days. On top of the tax bill sits a letter from Pacific Cascade Timber. Second offer. $18,000 for the standing timber on the South 40. Old-growth Douglas fir that Emmett never cut because he said trees were a savings account you shouldn't touch until the interest was tall enough to shade your grandchildren. $18,000. That's 75 tax bills. That's a new truck, a new boring bar, a year without worry. Dale sits there a long time. The stub pencil rolls between his broad fingers. The pale gray-blue eyes stare at the number. His shoulders, heavy, square, set back even when exhaustion pulls at them, sag just slightly against the chair. Then he stands, walks outside into the dark. No coat. The cold hits the ruddy tan across his nose, and the freckles disappear into the flush. He walks to the fence line and puts his hand on cold iron. 280 blocks, each one catalogued, each one waiting for the right buyer, the right build, the right moment. The weight of them, literal tons of cast iron standing patient in the Oregon rain, steadies something in his chest. He tears the timber letter in half, then in quarters, drops the pieces in the burn barrel on his way back inside. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? By spring of '82, he sells 3 blocks in a single month. Best stretch yet. Word seeps further. A restoration shop in Portland starts calling. Then one in Medford. Dale's name circulates in the small, quiet world of men who need iron that doesn't exist in catalogs anymore. By 1983, Dale's inventory crosses 300 blocks, and he builds a second row along the north fence. But the county sends him a letter about zoning violations. Dale drives to the county office with his notebook and a single question. Is a farmer's equipment subject to the same ordinance? He doesn't call ahead, doesn't hire a lawyer, just climbs into the truck on a Tuesday morning, that faded dark green canvas jacket over the cream thermal Henley, the small black oilcloth notebook in his left breast pocket, and drives 32 minutes to the Harlan County Courthouse Annex. The woman at the zoning desk looks up. Dale sets the notebook on the counter, open to a page dense with pencil entries, and repeats the question. Is a farmer's equipment subject to the same ordinance as residential storage? She blinks. Sir, I'd need to see. I'll wait. And he does. Weight forward on the balls of his feet, hands resting flat on the counter, unhurried, like a man who's already where he needs to be. Now, here's what Kimball didn't count on. See, Kimball filed that zoning complaint under residential nuisance, section 14.3 of the county code. Unsightly accumulation, junk vehicles and scrap. The kind of ordinance designed for someone with 6 dead pintos in the yard and a couch on the roof. He figured Dale was just some pack-rat hillbilly hoarding garbage along his fence line, and the county would send a crew with a flatbed, and that would be the end of it. But Dale isn't storing waste. Dale is warehousing parts. The notebook proves it. Every single block on that property has a serial number logged. Casting date where visible, bore diameter measured and recorded, condition notes, cracked water jacket, scored cylinder wall, spun bearing seat. And beside those condition notes, 12 entries with a different mark, a small check, a date, and a dollar figure. 12 blocks sold. 12 receipts, carbon copies, because Dale keeps carbons of everything. Each one sold to a working farm within 40 miles. Each one rebored on Dale's machine, sleeved where necessary, returned to agricultural service, pulling a hay baler or running a grain auger or turning an irrigation pump. He's not a junkyard. He's a parts warehouse for agricultural equipment repair. The county clerk hesitates. She pulls the agricultural exemption language. Section 22.1. Equipment and materials held in active inventory for farm-related mechanical service are classified as agricultural supplies, not residential storage, provided the operator can demonstrate ongoing commercial activity. 12 sales, 12 receipts, 12 engines back in fields. Kimball pushes. Of course he does. He's there at the hearing 2 weeks later. That same operations manual smile, that same clipboard posture. With respect to the board, he says, and Lord, the way that man says with respect, like he's spitting on your shoes and calling it a shine. This is a residential property. The respondent is not a licensed dealer. He's accumulating industrial refuse and calling it inventory. Any reasonable person can see. I have receipts, Dale says. 4 words. No raised voice. No argument about what a reasonable person can see. The zoning board rules in his favor, 4-1. The single dissent is Kimball's cousin by marriage, which surprises exactly no one. Dale drives home, parks, walks the fence line in the late afternoon light, running his hand along the tops of the blocks the way another man might run his hand along a banister. Each one a known quantity, each one waiting. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Not a flash of genius, not some lightning bolt in the shower. A slow, patient bet that the world would eventually come around to needing what you'd been saving all along. That's a different kind of courage. The loud kind gets statues. The quiet kind gets results. Between 1984 and 1988, the inventory grows to 500 blocks. Dale builds wooden cradles from scrap oak, notched at the top like rifle racks, bolted to treated 4x4 runners so they sit 6 inches off the ground, clear of the mud. He organizes them by family. Small block Chevy along the south fence, grouped by generation. The 283s and 327s closest to the shop, the 350s and 400s farther out. Ford FE series along the north run. 332s, 352s, the big 390s farmers love for their torque curve. Mopar wedge blocks in a shorter row by the barn. International Harvester, the oddballs, the workhorses nobody else stocks. Tucked under a lean-to roof he builds in a single weekend. His fence line becomes a lending library of cast iron. He knows every shelf. Meanwhile, the regional foundry in Middlesboro, Campton Castings, starts shifting. They've been the go-to for decades. Cracked block? Call Campton. Worn cylinder? Campton'll sleeve it. But somewhere around 1985, Management changes hands. New ownership. New priorities. They're chasing automotive contract volume now. Fleet rebuilds for dealerships in Lexington and Knoxville. The big dollar repeat work. And the farmer calling about one cracked 360 Ford for his hay truck. He goes to the back of the line. Lead times stretch from 6 weeks to 12, then 14. Prices double. A re-sleeve job that cost $80 in 1982 now runs $160. Minimum order surcharges appear. The phone gets answered on the 6th ring instead of the 2nd. Small noise. Catastrophic failure. Not for Campton. They're making money hand over fist on fleet contracts. But for every farmer in a 3-county radius who needs one block, one repair, one engine back in the field before planting season ends. Catastrophic. Dale's prices stay flat. $175 for a standard rebore. $250 for a sleeved block with new cam bearings seated. Same prices he charged in 1977, adjusted for nothing, because his overhead is nothing. His machine is paid for. His inventory cost him scrap rates. His labor is his own. The notebook knows what he has before the customer finishes describing what they need. A man starts saying, 67 Ford, 390, and Dale's already walking toward the north fence, 3rd cradle from the gate. 3 neighboring farmers figure it out before anyone else. Virgil Combs shows up first with a cracked 350 in the bed of his pickup, not to buy, but to drop off. Figured you'd want it, Virgil says. Beats paying the dump $14. Earl Sloan follows a week later with 2 international blocks from a retired combine. Then a younger man named Heck Bolin, barely 23, brings a Ford 300 inline 6 with a cracked water jacket and sets it by the gate without even knocking. The zoning complaint is withdrawn, and Dale's fence line is reclassified as agricultural equipment storage. But the real victory is quieter. 3 more farmers start saving their cracked blocks instead of paying the dump fee. In 1989, Campton Castings announces it will no longer accept single-unit agricultural casting orders. Minimum run, 40 units. Now let that sink in. 40 units. You're a man with a cracked block on a 1958 Oliver, and you need 1 casting. 1. The foundry that's poured agricultural iron since 1947 turns around and tells you the minimum order is 40 identical pieces. Who the hell needs 40 Oliver blocks? Nobody. That's the point. Campton isn't in the farming business anymore. They're chasing a General Motors contract. Passenger car engine blocks, high volume, automated pour lines, robotic finishing. The margins are thin, but the volume is enormous. And some suit in a boardroom decided that retooling for a single tractor block between car runs costs more in downtime than the casting is worth. Agricultural work gets reclassified as legacy production. First, it's deprioritized. Lead times stretch from 4 weeks to 12. Then it's priced out. Surcharges for pattern storage. Surcharges for short runs. Surcharges for alloys that aren't in the daily melt. Then, quietly, it disappears from the catalog entirely. No announcement, no letter. You call the number, and a receptionist tells you they don't offer that service anymore. Would you like to be transferred to sales for their automotive line? The impact hits Harlan County like a slow-motion flood. Spring of 1990. A 1962 International harvester on the Bolin farm throws a rod clean through the cylinder wall. Blocks done. Split wide open, coolant mixing with oil, The engine seized before Roy Boland even got it out of second gear, crossing his own pasture. He calls the IH dealer in Lexington. They don't stock that block anymore. Haven't for years. They can order a remanufactured long block from a warehouse in Indianapolis. $2,400. 8 weeks minimum, probably 10 with freight. Roy Boland made $11,000 last year. $2,400 is not a repair bill. It's a funeral. But somebody, maybe his wife, maybe a neighbor at the feed store, mentions the Hennessy place. That fence line out on Route 119. The one with all those damn engine blocks lined up like tombstones. Roy drives out on a Tuesday. Dale meets him at the gate, pale gray-blue eyes squinting against the morning light, that small black oilcloth notebook already out of his left breast pocket. Roy describes the failure. Loss of coolant pressure, white smoke, then the bang. Dale nods, flips to a page near the middle of the notebook, runs his thumb down a column of numbers written in pencil so small you'd need a magnifying glass. Row 7, Section C. 2 IH 345 blocks. One has a hairline crack in a non-critical boss. The thermostat housing mount, upper left. Never penetrated the water jacket. Never would either, not unless you torqued that bolt to 60 foot-pounds, which no sane mechanic does. Dale walks Roy back through the rows, points to a block sitting on 2 railroad ties, wrapped in a torn feed sack to keep the bores dry. Pulls the sack off. The casting is gray and clean, number stamps still legible. 3 days later, Dale has it rebored and ready. Here's what that looks like, because the process matters. Dale's boring bar is a 1971 Rattler, belt-driven, heavy as a safe. The honing stones spin at 220 RPM. Not fast, not slow. Just the speed where carbide cuts iron without glazing. Cutting oil flows from a reservoir mounted above, dripping down through copper tubes onto the stones, carrying away iron dust in a gray slurry that collects in a pan below. Every 6th pass, Dale stops the machine, wipes the bore with a clean rag, sets a micrometer across the diameter, 1/1000th of an inch tolerance, and he's chasing it in half-thousandths. The crosshatch pattern the stones leave isn't random. It's angled at 45 degrees, a lattice of tiny grooves that hold oil against the piston rings during break-in. Too steep and the rings never seat. Too shallow and the oil runs off. Dale doesn't measure the angle with a protractor. His hands know the feel of a true cylinder by touch. The way the hone chatters when the stone is cocked wrong. The way it hums when everything is square. He charges Roy Boland $225. Roy's tractor is running again by Friday. Word doesn't just spread after that. Word accelerates. Farmers from Bell County, from Knox County, start driving to Dale's fence with tape measures and greasy notebook pages of their own. Bore diameters scrawled on the back of feed receipts, casting numbers copied off blocks too cracked to save. They describe their engine's symptoms the way you'd describe a sick animal to a vet. Dale listens, flips through the notebook, walks them to the exact block. Then, in February of 1991, the other shoe drops hard enough to shake the ground. Campton Castings closes, not restructures, not downsizes, closes. doors locked, furnaces cold, sand molds dumped in the scrapyard. And here's the part that'll make your stomach turn. They destroy the patterns, the wooden masters that every casting is poured from. Hundreds of them. Agricultural patterns dating back to the 1940s. They don't sell them, don't donate them to a trade school, don't even offer them to the farmers who depend on those parts. They break them up for firewood and landfill, because storing them costs money, and the GM contract fell through anyway, and the whole operation is just done. Every farm in Harlan, Bell, and Knox counties running equipment older than 1980 is now dependent on the used parts market. And the used parts market is Dale's fence. He does not raise his prices, not by $1, not by a dime. Someone asks him why. Some farmer standing at the gate, genuinely confused, because he'd triple the price if he were sitting on the only supply in 3 counties. Dale's answer is short, plain, and lands like a closed door. Granddad said nothing is scrap until the last one is gone. Didn't say anything about gouging the man who needs it. That's not charity. That's philosophy with a spine. Dale sells 31 blocks in a single spring, more than he sold in the previous 5 years combined. And the notebook's margin notes start recording something new, blocks he can no longer replace. By 1992, Dale's fence line holds 1,247 cataloged engine blocks. And for the first time, people who laughed at him are asking how his system works. Not all of them, not loudly, but the shift is unmistakable. The way a creek changes direction after enough seasons of quiet erosion. Grudging silence has given way to something else, genuine curiosity, delivered in the only language Harlan County men know how to speak it, sideways, while leaning on a truck hood, while pretending to talk about something else entirely. Earl Sloan is the first one who asks straight. Earl farms 200 acres north of Dale's property, runs a mixed operation, tobacco, hay, a few head of cattle. His International 966 threw a rod the previous autumn, and he'd watched Dale pull a replacement block from row 6 like a man reaching for a coffee mug on a familiar shelf. That efficiency haunted Earl all winter. So one cold morning in February, he pulls up Dale's gravel road and says he's got 3 old blocks sitting behind his barn, 2 Farmall 560s and a Ford flathead, and he wants to know how Dale checks them for cracks, whether they're worth keeping or just taking up space. Dale walks him to the shop without a word of ceremony, pulls out a propane torch and a can of penetrating oil, heats the suspect area of a cast block until the metal is warm to the touch, not red, just warm. Then wipes the oil across the surface with a rag. Shows Earl how a crack will wick the oil into a dark line, thin as a hair, visible against the heated iron in a way it never would be cold. Earl watches, nods, asks one question about depth assessment. Dale answers it in 11 words. That's the whole lesson. Earl drives home with knowledge that would have cost him 3 busted engines to learn on his own. Nobody talks about it at the feed store, but Earl's blocks end up cataloged behind his barn within the month. And 2 other farmers ask him the same question before spring. Here's the thing the county never formally acknowledged, and it matters. In the spring of 1992, the University of Kentucky's Cooperative Extension Service published its annual agricultural report for Eastern Kentucky. Buried on page 43, a single paragraph noted that Harlan County farms reported the lowest equipment downtime rate in the region. Average days out of service per tractor, 4.2, against a regional average of 11.7. Per farm parts expenditure, $340 annually, against $1,180 across the rest of the district. No explanation offered, no name attached. But if you drove through Harlan County that year and looked at the fence lines, you'd see iron everywhere. Blocks sitting in rows behind barns, organized by make, year, displacement. A system spreading through mimicry, the way good ideas always spread when institutions are too proud to endorse them. Dale's own operation had settled into a rhythm as steady as breathing. 60 blocks processed per year, cleaned, assessed, cataloged, or rebored depending on condition. Roughly 40 sold or traded to farms within a 50-mile radius at prices between $150 and $400 depending on the work involved. The remaining 20, blocks with structural failures too deep to machine around, cracks that ran through bearing saddles or cylinder walls in ways no sleeve could fix. Those became fence post anchors, barn door counterweights, drainage channel supports. Nothing left his property without a purpose. Nothing entered the waste stream. His grandfather's words lived in that practice like a heartbeat. Waste is just material you haven't understood yet. The financial picture by 1992 looked like this. Ironwork alone brought in somewhere between $9,000 and $11,000 a year. Hay from the 30 tillable acres, land that had been pale and calcium-starved when he inherited it, and now ran dark as coffee grounds from a decade of careful composting, brought $4,000. A small beef operation, 12 head of Angus on the hillside pastures, brought $6,000. Total gross, roughly $21,000. Modest by any suburban standard, but Dale owned the land outright, owed nothing to any bank, any dealer, any chemical company. Had never signed a loan document in his life. The brass buckle on his wide belt was the same one he'd worn at 23. The scuffed brown work boots got resold every 18 months at a cobbler in Everts. The black oilcloth notebook in his left breast pocket was on its 4th replacement. Same brand, same stub pencil in the spine, and the system it contained was worth more than anything a catalog could price. Which brings us to the catalog man. A farm equipment dealer from Lexington drove down in a white Suburban one Saturday in June. Polished shoes, clean khakis, a business card with embossed lettering. He'd heard about Dale's inventory, probably through the extension report, probably through word of mouth, traveling up the chain the way it does when money smells opportunity. He walked the fence line with wide eyes, did the math out loud. 1,200 blocks at $80 each. He'd write a check for 100,000 right there, right then. Load them onto flatbeds within the week. Sell them through his catalog at 600 apiece to restoration shops and hobby farmers across the Midwest. Dale listened, let the man finish, stood there with his weight forward on the balls of his feet, pale gray-blue eyes steady under those heavy brows, the faint freckles across his cheekbones catching the June light. They belong where they're needed, Dale said, not in a warehouse in Lexington. The dealer blinked, tried again, offered 90 per block. Dale shook his head once, slow, the way a barn door swings shut on a windless day. The man left. The blocks stayed, every single one of them. Have you ever turned down the kind of money that would make your neighbor's jaws drop? Not because you didn't need it, but because you understood something about value that the man with the checkbook never would. Then came a Thursday in October. A clean truck on the gravel road, not white, dark blue, well-maintained but not new. Behind the wheel, a face Dale hadn't seen in almost a decade. Roger Kimball, former extension agent, the man who'd filed zoning complaints, who'd called Dale's fence line a disposal hazard, who'd once stood on this very property and said the words that still echoed like a slap. "This isn't a farm operation, son. This is a junkyard with delusions." Kimball was retired now, softer around the middle, no clipboard, no county seal on the door. Just a man with a cracked 360 Mopar block from a 1975 Dodge Power Wagon he used on his own small place. 20 acres outside Loyal, bought with his pension. He didn't mention the zoning complaint, didn't mention the hearings, the letters, the years of institutional condescension delivered with a smile. He just asked, quiet as a man can ask, if Dale might have one that matches. Dale pulled the black oilcloth notebook from his breast pocket, flipped to the index. Row 12, Section A. A 360 cubic inch Mopar, pulled from a 74 D200, assessed clean in 1987. "I'll have it ready Thursday," Dale said. Roger Kimball visits Dale's property, not with a clipboard, but with a cracked 360 Mopar block from his own tractor, asking quietly if Dale might have one that matches. It is 2003, and Dale Hennessy is 51 years old, and the fence line that was supposed to be his shame has become the thing that held 3 counties together. Roger Kimball stood there that afternoon with his cracked 360 Mopar block on a hand truck, and Dale walked him down the row without a word, found the match in under 4 minutes, and charged him $40 for a casting that would have cost $600 from a rebuilder. If a rebuilder even had one, which they didn't. Kimball paid, shook Dale's hand, left without apology, because apology wasn't the currency here. The currency was iron, and iron doesn't care about pride. By 2003, the inventory has thinned. What started at 1,247 blocks sits now around 800. Dale has sold or placed over 400 castings back into working engines across the region, into combines that needed to finish a harvest, into irrigation pumps that fed alfalfa through drought, into the backup generators that kept dairy coolers running when ice storms dropped the grid. Some blocks he knows by heart. A 292 Chevy Inline 6, serial suffix ending in J7, that went into Harlan Moore's grain truck in 1998 and is still running. A flathead Ford from '52 with a hairline crack Dale sealed with a technique from page 43 of Emmett's notebook. Furnace preheat, nickel rod, slow cool under fire brick for 6 hours. That one lives in a sawmill now, turning a blade 3 days a week. He knows them by their serial numbers, the way some men know their children's birthdays. And now there's Cody. Cody Hennessy is 22, broad across the shoulders the same way Dale is. Same pale gray-blue eyes under heavy brows. Same crooked nose. Family nose. Broken the same way 3 generations running on the same low beam in the same barn. Cody drives up from Corvallis on weekends. He doesn't know engines yet. That's fine. Dale hands him the oilcloth notebook, the original, Emmett's handwriting still legible on the early pages, Dale's tighter script filling the middle and back, and says the thing that matters. You don't need to know engines. You need to know iron. The engine is just the shape the iron takes. Cody nods, writes it down in his own notebook, a blue one, spiral-bound, cheap. Dale doesn't comment on the binding. The words are what matter. The training is physical. Dale teaches him to read a casting by its grain, by its ring when tapped with a ball-peen hammer, by the color of the rust. Orange means surface, red-brown means shallow, black means deep, and deep means stress. He teaches him to read serial numbers half-worn by decades. He teaches him the filing system, not alphabetical, not numerical, but geographical along the fence line. Row by row, post by post. Each block's position recorded in the notebook with a page reference and a date. The world, meanwhile, catches up. A university agricultural extension office, the very same system that once sent Roger Kimball to Dale's property with a clipboard and a condescending smile, publishes a paper. Legacy Equipment Maintenance Networks, community-supported parts libraries as rural infrastructure. 12 pages, peer-reviewed. They cite Dale's operation without naming him. Call it a case study in Eastern Oregon, with over 800 units of preserved legacy casting inventory serving a catchment area of approximately 1,200 active farms. Dale reads the paper once, sets it on the kitchen table, doesn't frame it, doesn't send it to anyone, doesn't feel anything particular about it. The blocks don't care about papers, neither does he. But he's thinking in decades now. His health is fine, strong back, steady hands, the short gray stubble coming in thicker at his jaw, the faint scatter of freckles still visible across his cheekbones when summer brings the sun. He works every day, but some castings are irreplaceable. Certain years, certain foundries, certain alloys that nobody pours anymore because the sand molds were broken up in the 70s. Dale starts marking entries in the notebook with a small star. Last known unit. A starred block does not sell except in genuine emergency. A farm that will go under without it. A family that has no other option. Those stars are promises to the future. Each one says, "This iron outlived the factory that made it, and it will outlive me, and it will be here when someone needs it badly enough to deserve it." There are 47 stars in the notebook by the end of 2003. Cody asks the question one evening. They're sitting on the tailgate of Dale's truck, looking down the fence line in the bronze light of October. The blocks cast long shadows. Cody asks why Dale never sold the whole lot when he had the chance. Back when the scrap price spiked in '97. Could have cleared $60,000, $70,000 in a week. Dale is quiet. The small, pale birthmark on the left side of his neck catches the light as he turns his head slightly, looking out at the iron. Then he says it plainly, the way Emmett wrote it 60 years ago in that same oilcloth notebook, on the very first page. in pencil that has somehow never smudged. Nothing is scrap until the last one is gone. He says it the way you say something you've earned the right to say, not as wisdom, but as fact. The way you'd say water runs downhill. The way you'd say iron rings true. 2006. Dale is 54. The silver has crept fully into his stubble, 3 days' growth as always, and his sandy hair has gone ash-gray at the temples. He stands at the fence with Cody on a Tuesday morning, mist sitting low across the property, and a blue truck backs down the gravel drive. A young farmer, late 20s, nervous hands, drops a cracked LS Series block off the tailgate. First modern casting in the pile, aluminum and iron. Computer-controlled engine, built in a factory that still exists, from a truck only 8 years old. But the dealer wants $4,000 for a replacement, and this kid's irrigation pump doesn't run without it, and his alfalfa doesn't grow without the pump. Dale looks at it, looks at Cody, hands him the oilcloth notebook and the stub pencil from his left breast pocket. Write it down. Cody does. New page, LS Series, serial number, date, position, end of row 14, post 6. Condition, cracked cylinder wall, number 4. Repairable, possible, needs assessment. The system continuing. The fence line stretches into morning mist, iron and oak and patience, and the sound of a pencil on paper is the only sound that matters. A young man's hand, recording what an old man saved, what a dead man started, what the world once called worthless, and now cannot do without. Dale's grandnephew opens the oilcloth notebook to the first page. Nothing is scrap until the last one is gone, and walks out to the fence line where a truck is already backing up with a block for the pile.